Welcome, and thanks for joining us here today. So what we're going to do this afternoon is talk about some of the major trends happening. Kenna, you need headphones, mate. All right. Talk about some of the major trends in healthcare, what we're seeing in terms of disruptions in the market, and more importantly, how healthcare providers are addressing these disruptions, are looking to transform the way they operate to reflect the changing expectations and the changing dynamics in that market. So just by way of introduction, my name is Michael Barnes. I am the head of research for Forrester Research here in Australia. So I lead a team of analysts across a wide array of areas. And what I want to do today, before I introduce a couple of panelists up to have an interactive discussion around the topic of healthcare and some of the disruptions we're seeing, is to share some findings from some research that Forrester did in conjunction with Salesforce. And first, I'd like to thank the sponsor, PwC, for sponsoring the healthcare track that you're a part of today. So again, what I want to do to start is share some research, and you'll get access to the research. I really just want to share some highlights before we kick off the discussion. So what we did around the middle of last year, Salesforce commissioned us to do a study of healthcare professionals in Australia. So we spoke with over 200 healthcare professionals. Now, these are folks that either influenced decisions, were on teams that made decisions, or were personally responsible for decision making for technology investments related to patient care, patient experience. As you can see from the numbers, we spoke with folks across a wide variety of departments, including administration, customer service, customer experience, contact centers, and IT. And we also targeted hospitals and practitioners and resources of different sizes. So what did we find? Let me summarize a couple of the key findings. First off, all the providers we spoke to, and indeed all the providers in this industry, understand that there's disruption happening, right? And you can really oversimplify it down to two particular angles. One is the internal pressure to change, whether it's a need to become more productive, to better leverage the limited resources that you have, to shift some of the effort from administrative tasks towards more patient care, to manage some of the more complex treatment that's happening. Those are all ongoing challenges for providers. There's also external pressures, right? Things like My Health, things like the Royal Commission on Aged Care, changes in demographics, the fact that patients are increasing in age, changing in funding, and something you've heard about throughout today, this notion of the fourth industrial revolution. Basically the idea that we all have expectations in our personal lives as consumers, as customers. We expect that type of engagement with everyone we engage with, including our healthcare providers. But there's some challenges. What we found from the study, 60% of the respondents we spoke to do not believe they have the systems and processes necessary to manage the patient life cycle. Nearly 60% don't believe they are effective at patient-hospital communication. And a little over 50% don't believe they have effective patient insights in their facilities. Now, one of the other angles we took through this questioning, through the study, was to understand where the priorities are for practitioners. And there were two key areas that I wanted to touch on. The first one is this shifting focus from processes, from looking to optimize and automate existing approaches and processes and capabilities towards a more externally focused, patient-centric, outcome-based view of their capabilities. That's one. The other one, which is an age-old challenge, is trying to better align business and technology priorities and ensure they're aligned towards the common goal, which should be patient outcomes. Again, that's the expectation. That's where folks want to move. But in terms of reality, you see the numbers on the right. So more than half of respondents, only a little more, believe that they can effectively respond to the high volume of incoming patient requirements. Nearly 40% don't believe they have the capabilities in place to ensure patient data, which is a huge issue in terms of trust and is becoming an even huger issue over time. And the last one, 40% of the respondents we spoke to in Australia don't believe or don't feel confident that their leadership fully understands and is embracing this patient-centric approach and this need for patient relationship management initiatives. That's a shockingly high number. Okay, so in keeping with the theme for this particular session, what I wanted to do is share Forrester's global as well as local predictions, what we see happening for 2019 in healthcare. And from that, we'll segue into a discussion. So the top 5 predictions for healthcare from Forrester, in no particular order. Number 1, we expect providers to invest more in voice of the customer and CX measurement. Now, a lot of providers are already investing in voice of the customer in terms of basic customer surveys, maybe things like Net Promoter Score. We're talking about going to a whole other level here. We're talking about the need for far more sophisticated measurement for 2 reasons. One, it helps drive culture change internally, helps folks move in the same direction. 2, it's absolutely crucial in order to justify the investments and the initiatives that are underway and illustrate clear value from those initiatives. The second prediction, leadership will recognize the need to become more patient-obsessed. Firms in other industries have embraced this notion of customer obsession. And we're not talking about customer engagement as a nice to have or customer engagement as a stated direction. When we talk about obsession, and in this case patient obsession, what we're talking about is having that patient-centric view influence and ultimately change all of the underlying operational levers that impact the organization. So that's things like structure, culture, processes, talent, technology, and metrics. All of those get impacted. The third one, investments in patient engagement management will increase, alongside things like task and case management. And Eric from Salesforce will talk more about that in a moment. The fourth one, influx of data will shift the focus, and the overwhelming volume of data will shift the focus from managing the data to searching for insights. What does that mean? That means firms will invest in things like governance, interoperability, and security to enable better trust. And the final prediction, virtual care encounters will outpace traditional care. Just as we as individuals, we as customers, we as consumers are increasingly used to operating in a digital world, we expect the same type of engagements with our healthcare providers, whether it's simply renewing a prescription or getting some advice or some emergency services. We expect that to be digital from an experience standpoint. So that's the predictions and the view from Forrester. What I'd like to do now is invite a couple of my colleagues to come up and speak with us. So first we have John Fogarty, Managing Director of Interregnum Health. Thanks, John. And Eric Wagner, I'm going to get your title right. Senior Director, Global Provider Strategy so go-to-market for healthcare. Is that fair?
Fair.
Excellent. All right.
We'll go with it.
All right. So you heard the theory from me and what we're seeing as an analyst firm in terms of trends. Before I sit down, I just want to pass it to John. You've got a wealth of experience, expertise, and knowledge as a practitioner, and getting your hands dirty, as it were. So I'm really interested to maybe start things off by hearing what you're seeing in the market.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing in the market is this shift to the recognition that the patient is now a consumer of care and is very, very interested in being hands-on and taking control of their own destiny, just as we do in all the other aspects of our life, be it ordering our food online through Uber Eats or interacting with our bank account. We've attracted an elephant into the room, but
it's a party now.
No
I'm not
distractions.
sure that
at all.
part of this is about it. Is there maybe the elephant in the room?
There is an elephant in the room.
There's an elephant in the room. But maybe the elephant in the room, that was really good, wasn't planned at all. In terms of the healthcare sector, particularly in Australia, is that there's been a lot of focus in developing systems that are very centred on care delivery within the four walls of a hospital or a practice, or be it a public hospital, a private hospital, or a GP practice or a community setting. But none of that's really been outward facing. So as a patient or a consumer, I know that my data is held in 4 or 5 different places. None of these places talk to each other, and there's no way for me. I mean, my health record, an interesting story. It's some sort of progress, but how's that going to roll out to help me as a patient have everybody who I interact with have the actual real-time, up-to-date information? And I think that's the shift we need to see. We're starting to see some of it, but I think for healthcare providers to survive in what's a very tough funding environment, particularly in private health where there's reform on the way around, which is going to tighten revenue, tighten margins, and some players will probably find it difficult to stay afloat in an insurance game, or maybe some of the private hospital operators will start to struggle a bit. So the battle for the patient or the customer, or and trying to have some sort of lifelong relationship with that, I think that's the next battleground for healthcare in Australia.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this. I mean, it's easy to talk in theory, right, about the need to shift from kind of process-centric view, in analyst speak, kind of an inside-out perspective, very much process operationally focused on the way we've always done things, towards this notion of more patient-centric, which again, analysts speak outside in, thinking from the patient's view and using that as a baseline for services. But realistically, where are folks at in terms of making that shift, both from a mindset as a starting point, I'd say, but then in actual operations, in the functions and in the processes and the capabilities? Yeah,
I mean, I think I'd have to say it's very early stages, and there's been very little shift. It continues to surprise me. I booked myself in for a scan of some sort next week with a cardiologist. Don't worry, I'm not about to hark it here on the stage, but and this guy's very progressive, very technology focused in his practice around the machines that he uses. But I got sent 2 PDF attachments to fill out and take in with me. I mean, that's...
But it's electronic, John.
It's a PDF. Yeah, it's a PDF, yeah. And I reckon if my hairdresser, who I pay $40 every few weeks to cut my hair, can send me a reminder on text, then there's something completely wrong with it, with us if we can't think more from, well, what's the consumer actually want? And I've seen some examples, even in medical practices. I was speaking to an obstetrician last week, young, probably early 40s, female obstetrician, extremely busy practice in Perth, and just asked her how things were in her business, and she said, people pay a lot of money for private health insurance. I get that. I asked them to pay more in terms of an out-of-pocket expense. I get they're looking for value for money. So I spend, probably several hours a day personally responding by phone to patient queries about their progress through their pregnancy. That's fantastic service, but why do it by phone? Why spend, why not have a number of different channels that patients can relate to as consumers? And one last story. Some private hospitals think direct advertising to people is the way to go. In fact, I was at Coles the other day and I looked on the back of my docket and found a provider advertising one of their obstetricians on the back on a shopper docket, and I thought, what, do I get a discount, or am I going to get free fries with this? Or I mean, I think there needs to be a mindset shift, and people talk about patient centricity in the hospitals and things about how they deliver care, and they want to be patient centric. Well, we hope they're or person centric. We'd sort of hope they're person centric, not say dog centric, because hopefully not. So that always confuses me, that person centric term. But so they think about it in the 4 walls, but they don't think about, well, actually, what's it like out there for the consumer who, healthcare for their health is their most important asset. Their experience in how they experience healthcare should be, very seamless and very personalised, but we're nowhere near it. So,
right, and what I see internationally and globally is really the same challenges here, right? The patients are the problem, the challenge, right? Because once they leave the facilities, we fall back into old habits. We go back to eating the same. We may not exercise. We may not take our medications on time. All of these same challenges are a global phenomenon. So being able to look outside the walls of the hospital and be able to engage those patients, start them on the right journey before they come in is a challenge, of course. But one of the biggest challenges to overcome it is because the facilities are so tied down with older siloed systems that the IT departments and the IT people are spending 95% of the time just trying to keep the lights on, to keep the operation running. So to now magically innovate and make some gigantic leap forward is very, very difficult for these facilities. And this is where companies like Salesforce and smaller providers or investment firms and things are looking to further technology in healthcare, because when they're looking for that leap forward, and obviously no one's found it yet, but these are there's small pockets in the States. There's a great group out of Nashville called 180 Health Partners. It's a very, very small use case, but it's driving incredible adoption rates. So it's opioid addicted pregnant mothers. So if the baby is born not addicted to opioids, which is of course the goal, the cost is around $3,000 US. But if the baby is born addicted to opioids, the cost to get them out of neonatology is around $72,000. So they went from a 17% engagement trying to do different methods. They've leveraged the Salesforce platform, and they're now at 91% engagement. The first year alone, they saved $1.2 million. And these are the small little pockets where we start to see, the technology start to really take hold and improve processes. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
Hey, Eric, I'm really curious. Just a point you raised. The scenario you described as far as the healthcare providers really struggling, particularly the IT groups, maintaining the existing systems, right? And now being tasked to innovate alongside that when they don't really have the resources to do both.
Right.
That's happening in every industry, right? And there's been varying degrees of success, I suppose, overcoming that. Salesforce clearly is in various industries as well. I'm just curious, is there much you're seeing in other industries that healthcare can learn from? I mean, obviously it's unique in some ways, but in a lot of ways it's not. It's the same problems.
It's a very good call out. So one of the things that we see, and we're starting to see in the industry as I have meetings, is I'm talking to chief marketing officer now who came from the auto industry, and I'm speaking to people who are now coming in from other industries, operation officers who've come in from manufacturing, and people are starting to apply Six Sigma technology or thought processes to just analyze the workflow, because the facilities are so inefficient. Manhattan, I'll use another example, Beth Israel Deaconess, right? There's nowhere else to go in Manhattan, right? So the team was charged with figure out a way that we can do more MRIs with the same amount of machines. Well, that's a straight, workflow process, right? So they applied the Toyota lean manufacturing processes, and then they identified, the top 10 things that slowed them down. And when you boil down what those challenges were, it was all around communication, right? The patient came to the radiology department and they didn't speak English, so they didn't have a translator.
Right.
We knew on the floor that they didn't speak English. Or as an elderly patient, they couldn't start an IV because, of course, the veins were rolling, so they needed a phlebotomist to come down. It's all just communication, but it's always been so disparate because the technologies weren't there.
Right.
Look, the EHRs do a good job, but they do a very specific job, and many of them, of course, were designed 40, even 50 years ago, and to magically expect them to be a system of engagement, to extend communication, it's simply not fair to those vendors. And this is where, again, Salesforce comes in with an open API structure, obviously with MuleSoft, great connections like Bridge Connector is a great partner for API connectors. We can now connect these siloed systems and do great things and allow facilities to do great things quickly and rapidly.
Yeah, fair enough. John, I'm curious to come back to your point. Given your background as an administrator, I'm just curious in terms of where to begin to make the change. You mentioned it's early days, right? There's lots of places we can start with, right? I mean, there's certainly issues with process. There's issues, to Eric's point, with data and lack of maybe interoperability in the data. But also, kind of one area I know you're passionate about is leadership. And I'm just curious. I mean, you got to impact all those levers. But where do you start? What's most effective, or how do you, I guess, prioritize between those efforts to make real change?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. I think, and as you say, I think it does take very strong leadership, because inherently people think if we're going to invest in something digital, it's going to cost us a bomb. So there's this reluctance to invest, and almost this, and health is still a very conservative environment where shifting things in a new direction takes a lot of hard work on relationship management. So there's a real leadership piece to it. But, even some of the work that I've been involved in the last sort of 12 to 18 months around developing patient portals, and another one I was involved in around developing a command centre for, almost air traffic control for operating theatres. It's not as expensive as you think it might be.
Right.
The investment, and in fact, people think, oh, we're just going to put in this U-Butte system and we're not going to get any savings. So my advice would be to pick one thing, right, and say, let's focus on that. Let's do the ROI on it. Let's see how it goes. And then use that as the proof of concept to say, right, we can do this more generally. Patients want to be able to interact with, going to hospital is a really scary thing for people. Sure. So they want to know as much as they can, and they don't want someone to mail them 35 pages of information. Yeah, right. They want to be able to go online and look at, okay, and then when, where do I go? What do I do? And then they want to be told, make sure you fast from 9 o'clock tonight for your surgery in the morning. All this stuff is really quite easily doable with, with sort of incremental investments. And this, people don't think there's a return on it, but the savings from keeping people safe and informed as they come through the hospital or the healthcare system, better informed people make better decisions, right, and the care is better and they understand what's happening to them. That's likely to have a downward impact on the length of stay, the incidents that might happen to them, medication errors, all that sort of thing. So, I think it has to be a small leap because we work in a very conservative industry. Right. But taking bite-sized chunks, proving that it works in one part of your business, and then looking at how you can roll that out. There's been a lot of focus in Australia on EMRs, and EMRs are great. Private sector will never invest in EMRs because you buying the big box costs you a lot of money. Even if it's in the cloud, it's still going to cost a bomb to roll it out. And try convincing the boards of the listed companies like HealthScope and Ramsay that they're going to get a return on investment if they spend $1 billion rolling out electronic medical record. So that you need something that's that leverages your existing systems. And I'm not here to plug Salesforce, but it is a good platform, but there are others as well, I'm sure. But leveraging those systems on top of what you've already got, it's probably going to get you a much better outcome than saying, oh, we're throwing everything out and we're going to buy Epic. And I hope no one from Epic's in the audience. I'm not being critical, but
it's okay.
It is a difficult decision. And in the States, there's subsidies provided by government to roll out these systems. That'll never happen in Australia.
Yeah, so. Yeah. And I think it's a term I've used for some time, and it's very foreign to healthcare, is that having the right system is you need to be able to fail fast. It's okay to start a process to improve and have it not work, but you need to be able to quickly change the scope, change the direction slightly, and then make it work. The investments, as are seen in these large systems, to John's point, is there's such a large investment, they feel frozen and they can't do it. Right. And now they've purchased a system that's so locked in and so tight. Now what do we do? So in the States, I work with the Cleveland Clinic and these other places. Cleveland Clinic spent $1 billion on Epic and the implementation of Epic. $1 billion. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't do a lot of great things, but when it doesn't do things well, the discussion then is, okay, it's just good enough because we made an investment and now, what else are we going to do, right? And these are the things that really tie up the American health system, and I say it and I'll continue to say it. I think the United States is a great example of not how to do it. I think Australia has an amazing opportunity to do it right, to assess it, to do it correctly, and use a layer of engagement. And I'll correct John, there is no other system, it's just Salesforce. But we're I think we're in a great place to be able to be a key player. We'd love to do it all. We can't. But again, with the openness of the platform, the open APIs and all these things, we have the ability to plug into other systems. And again, I really think, without calling out Epic too much, but the philosophy of doing it all yourself, it's a team approach, right? Sure. It's going to take a group of us, software people, systems, together to improve healthcare. It's not just one company that's going to come in and do it by themselves.
Yeah, fair enough. I just got the notice. We don't have much time left, and I want to kind of give you a chance for final thoughts. But I'm really curious, and this could be a quick yes or no. Everything you said, particularly around kind of massive investments in something like Epic, right? Kind of a system, goes against everything, certainly that we see in other industries that are trying to be more customer obsessed, which start by understanding the customers and their journeys, understanding the patients and their journeys, and identifying the pain points in the existing journey, and using that to help prioritize where to invest, as opposed to starting with the system, starting with a solution and trying to find the problems.
Right.
Are you seeing that, this is for both of you, in this sector, the way we're seeing it in other sectors, other industries?
I think part of the problem with the sector is that there's not a lot of joined up thinking between primary care, allied therapies, allied health, hospital care, aged care, home care. The system is fragmented, so that makes it difficult. So I've seen work that hospitals have done on their patient journey. I'm sure there are GP practices that are doing work on their patient journey, but no one's doing the joined up thinking.
Right.
And it's a difficult, and that's why patients get so confused in our system in Australia, that if someone could help develop, maybe Salesforce can do this, and somehow how to navigate your way through the system, and then join up the various experiences as you jump from one part of the sector to the next, then that would be a step forward. But at the moment, it's not happening.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, in the time we have left, final nuggets of wisdom, words of advice. What would you leave these folks with as far as what to do?
I'll return to the elephant. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So start small and go big. But voice of the customer, voice of the patient, that's the place to start.
I couldn't say it better myself.
All righty. And I believe then that is it. We're officially out of time. Eric, excellent. John, if you could all join me in welcoming and thanking them.
Thanks. Thank you
so much.
Excellent. Thanks, Jen.
Nice work. Great. Thanks, Eric.